The world feels heavy today, doesn't it? As if the very air we breathe is thick with the dust of old debts and new sorrows. We hear the rumors of nations rising against nations. Canada, a neighbor seeking a path through the storm. The United States, a giant under pressure. And Iran, a land of ancient beauty, now shadowed by the clouds of conflict. But I'm not here to talk to you about borders. I'm not here to talk about Operation Epic Fury or the tactical movements of men in high offices. I am here because in the next few minutes, we must look at something far more permanent than a headline. We must look at the heart. If you stay with me, if you listen, not just with your ears, but with that quiet place inside you, you might find that the big wave the world fears isn't the one coming from the sky. It's the one that has been building inside us for a long time. They say the international order is rupturing. They say the rules we wrote in ink are being washed away in red. It's easy to feel small. It's easy to feel like a leaf caught in a gale, watching kings and presidents play a game where the stakes are our very souls. But listen, listen. Peace is not a treaty signed in a gilded room. It is not the silence after the guns stop. True peace is a person. It is a choice. It is the radical, world-shaking decision to see the enemy and see instead a brother who is just as lost, just as frightened, and just as deeply loved by the Creator as you are. We see the headlines. Canada supports with regret. Trump feels the pressure. We see the Supreme Leader fallen, and we ask, where is the hope? The hope isn't in the de-escalation of a missile battery. The hope is in the reawakening of the human spirit. You were not born for this chaos. You were born for a purpose that predates every empire and will outlast every war. There is a divine timing to your life, a rhythm of grace that the noise of the world tries to drown out. When the world says strike, grace says heal. When the world says fear, faith says stand. We are at a crossroads, not just a political one, but a spiritual one. Will we be defined by the waves of destruction, or will we become the anchors? The transformation you seek in the world must begin in the quiet of your own heart. It's time to stop looking at the maps and start looking at the people. It's time to rediscover a hope that doesn't depend on who sits in the Oval Office or the Parliament, but on the one who holds the stars in place. Be still, know that you are seen, know that you are known, and know that even in the darkness, the light is not just coming. It is already here. The world feels heavy today, doesn't it? As if the very air we breathe is thick with the dust of old debts and new sorrows. We hear the rumors of nations rising against nations. Canada, a neighbor seeking a path through the storm. The United States, a giant under pressure. And Iran, a land of ancient beauty now shadowed by the clouds of conflict. But I'm not here to talk to you about borders. I'm not here to talk about political maneuvers or the tactical movements of men in high offices. I am here because in the next few minutes we must look at something far more permanent than a headline. We must look at the heart. If you stay with me, if you listen, not just with your ears, but with that quiet place inside you, you might find that the big wave the world fears isn't the one coming from the sky. It's the one that has been building inside us for a long time. There is a weight to this moment that transcends the ink on a newspaper or the flicker of a digital screen. It is the weight of the human soul trying to find its footing while the ground beneath it shifts like sand. We wake up to notifications that tell us the world is fracturing, that alliances are crumbling, and that the leaders we look to are caught in a web of their own making. It creates a tightness in the chest, a quiet anxiety that follows us into our kitchens and our workplaces. This isn't just about a policy shift in Ottawa or a defensive posture in Washington. This is about the collective burden of a humanity that has forgotten how to be still. We carry the history of every conflict, the echoes of every ancient grudge, as if they were our own. We feel the pressure of a clock that seems to be ticking faster toward a midnight we didn't ask for. But consider this. Why does it feel so heavy? Perhaps because you were never meant to carry the weight of the entire world on your shoulders. You were meant to carry a light, not a boulder. We obsess over the what-ifs of geopolitical strategy because it is easier than facing the what-is of our own inner peace. We look at the tension between powers and see a reflection of the tension within ourselves. the parts of us that want to strike back, the parts that want to hide, and the parts that are desperately crying out for a shepherd. The gravity of this moment is a call, not a condemnation. It is a summons to look past the noise of the great men and their great wars, to find the small, still voice that has been there since the beginning. The headlines will change by tomorrow morning. The pressure on the powerful will wax and wane. But the state of your spirit in the midst of the storm, that is the only thing that truly endures. We are witnessing a shaking of the foundation so that we might finally remember what it means to stand on the rock. Every rumor of war is an invitation to become a person of peace. Every announcement of support or opposition is a reminder that our true citizenship isn't found in a passport, but in a kingdom that cannot be shaken by a vote or a veto. We must breathe, we must look upward, we must realize that while the world is busy counting its weapons, the Creator is busy counting our tears. This weight you feel, it is not the end. It is the beginning of a hunger for something that no government can provide. It is the start of a journey back to the only source of rest that is deeper than the deepest ocean of human chaos. Think of the world as a vast, churning ocean. We see the whitecaps, the headlines of Canada's shifting stance, the geopolitical tremors in the Middle East, the tension radiating from Washington, and we call this the news. We call it reality. But there is a paradox in peace that most of us miss because we are too busy trying to stay afloat. We think of peace as something that happens when the waves stop, when the wind dies down, or when two men in a room finally agree not to destroy one another. But that is not peace. That is merely a truce. That is a temporary suspension of hostility, as fragile as the paper it's written on. True peace is a paradox because it does not require a calm sea to exist. In fact, it is most visible, most powerful, and most necessary when the storm is at its peak. When you see nations aligning and realigning, when the pressure on leaders becomes an almost physical weight that we all feel, the natural human response is to mirror that chaos within. We allow the external conflict to become an internal war. We let the uncertainty of the world's future rob us of the certainty of our own soul's rest. But listen closely. You cannot give what you do not have. We cry out for global peace. We post about it. We argue for it. Yet many of us haven't known a moment of true internal stillness in years. We are like people trying to put out a fire with a cup of gasoline because our own hearts are burning with the same fear and tribalism we see on the news. This paradox tells us that peace is not the absence of something, it is the presence of someone. It is a gift that was promised to us specifically for times exactly like this. When the world is loud, grace is a whisper. When the world is frantic, faith is a slow breath. We see Canada, we see the U.S., we see Iran, and we see a puzzle that seems impossible to solve. And it is impossible for man alone. But the paradox of peace is that when you surrender the need to control the outcome of history, you gain the power to change the atmosphere of your own home, your own community, and ultimately the world. It is a peace that surpasses all understanding, which is just a beautiful way of saying it doesn't make sense to have it right now. It doesn't make sense to be calm when the headlines are screaming. It doesn't make sense to hope when alliances are breaking. And yet, that is exactly where the light breaks through. It is in the very center of the pressure, in the very heart of the conflict, that this quiet, unshakable kingdom within begins to manifest. We are not waiting for the world to settle so we can be at peace. We are being called to be at peace so the world might finally see a different way to live. It is a strange and sobering thing to realize how quickly the structures of man, the very walls we've built to keep ourselves safe, can begin to show their cracks. We look at the world map and see lines drawn in ink, treaties signed with high-minded words about international order and global security. We speak of the rules-based system as if it were a physical fortress, something solid enough to protect the innocent and restrain the powerful. But as we watch the unfolding friction between nations, as we see the United States and Israel act with a sudden, sharp intensity, and we hear Canada's Prime Minister speak of regret for a rupturing world, we are reminded of a painful truth. These structures are only as strong as the hearts of the people who maintain them. When the heart hardens, the ink on the paper begins to fade. There is a fragility to the order of man that we often choose to ignore because the alternative is too frightening to contemplate. We want to believe that there is a committee, a council, or a court that can hold back the tide of human ambition and anger. Yet, we are seeing a moment where consultation is bypassed, where allies are left in the dark, and where the rules of engagement feel more like suggestions than laws. This is what happens when the collective will of humanity begins to fracture under the weight of fear. We stop looking for common ground and start looking for higher ground, not to find a better perspective, but to find a place where we can look down on our enemies. But do not be deceived into thinking that the crumbling of these earthly structures is the end of the story. In fact, history has shown us that it is often when the systems of men fail that the kingdom of the divine becomes most visible. When the towers of pride begin to lean, we are forced to look at the ground beneath our feet and ask, what is truly solid? If international law can be set aside in a weekend, if decades of diplomacy can vanish in the smoke of a single strike, then our hope was never meant to be anchored in those things to begin with. The fragility of this world's order is a reminder that we are citizens of a different country, one whose laws are written not in ink, but in love, whose borders are not guarded by missiles, but by mercy. The shaking of the world is not a sign to panic. It is a signal to refocus. It is a call to stop putting our ultimate trust in the princes of this world and to start investing in the eternal. The systems may rupture, the orders may fail, and the alliances may shift like the tide, but there is a truth that remains unshakable. When you see the structures of man failing, do not look at the ruins. Look at the one who stands outside of time, waiting for you to realize that his peace was the only foundation that was ever truly intended to hold you up. It is so easy to lose the human face in the digital glow of a map. We see the shapes of nations, the vast expanse of Canada, the reaching fingers of the United States, the ancient heart of Iran, and we treat them like pieces on a board. We talk about strategic interests and military assets as if we were discussing something cold and unfeeling. But when we hear of Canada's Prime Minister speaking of regret, or the pressure mounting in Washington, we must remember that behind every headline is a soul. Behind every policy is a person who wakes up in the morning with the same breath in their lungs as you, the same capacity for fear, and the same desperate need for a peace that doesn't come from a press release. Think of the innocent ones, not the leaders whose names we know, but the ones whose names are written only in the book of life. I'm talking about the mother in Tehran who is currently tucking her child into bed while the sky outside hums with a tension she cannot control. I'm talking about the young soldier in the West who is looking at a photo of his family, wondering if the pressure of his leaders will become the weight of his own sacrifice. When we pick sides, when we cheer for the support of one nation over another, or when we grow angry at the pressures of a president, we often forget that empathy is not a political weakness. It is a spiritual requirement. It is the ability to look at someone 1,000 miles away, someone who speaks a different language and prays in a different way, and to feel the tremor in their hands. The world wants us to harden. It wants us to see the other as a data point or a target. But there is a higher call, a call to look at the world with eyes of compassion. When we see the rupturing of the world order, as the leaders call it, we should see it as a rupture in our own family. If one member of the human family is suffering, if one nation is under the shadow of the sword, then we are all affected. The pressure we feel in our own lives is often a reflection of the collective groan of a creation that is tired of being torn apart. Do not let the noise of the conflict drown out the whisper of your own humanity. To have empathy in a time of war is a radical act of faith. It is a refusal to believe that the lines on a map are more important than the lines on a person's face. As the headlines continue to churn and the world holds its breath, let your breath be a prayer for those you will never meet. Let your heart be wide enough to hold the grief of both sides, for in the eyes of the Creator there is no us and them. There is only the beloved, lost and found, wandering through the same storm, hoping for the same dawn. We often speak of time as a line, a sequence of minutes, hours, and days that we march through with a sense of tireless urgency. We look at the world stage today and we see a frantic rush. There is the urgency of the United States and Israel moving with a speed that has left their closest allies, including Canada, standing in the shadows of the unknown. We see a world reacting to Operation Epic Fury, to the sudden fall of a leader, and to the immediate sharp pressures of a new geopolitical reality. In this rush, we feel that we must act now, decide now, and fear now. But there is a profound difference between human urgency and divine timing. Human urgency is born of fear. It is the child of the belief that if we do not strike, we will be struck. It is the frantic energy that builds when we think we are the masters of our own destiny, trying to outrun the shadows of the future. We see this in the headlines, nations scrambling to redefine their borders, leaders feeling the weight of the moment as if it were a suffocating shroud. We look at the conflict in Iran and the response from the West, and we see the world trying to force a resolution through the sheer will of power and speed. But true change, the kind of inner transformation that actually alters the course of history, rarely happens in the heat of a frantic moment. Divine timing is a different rhythm entirely. It is the slow, deliberate unfolding of a plan that was set in motion long before any president or prime minister took their seat. It is the stillness in the center of the storm. While the world is rushing toward what it calls the end, something eternal is just beginning. We must realize that the big waves of political upheaval are often just the surface noise. Beneath the surface, there is a deep, quiet current moving us toward a restoration that no military strike can achieve and no treaty can fully capture. When you feel the pressure to have an answer for everything that is happening in the Middle East or at your own borders, take a breath. Recognize that your life is not a series of accidents caught in the crossfire of powerful men. There is a season for everything. A season for the shaking of the foundations, and a season for the building of what is true. This moment of global tension is not just a crisis, it is a space. It is a space where the noise of man is becoming so loud that we are finally being forced to seek the silence of the divine. Do not let the world's frantic clock dictate the peace of your soul. The Creator is not surprised by the headlines of March 2026. He is not under pressure. And because he is not, you don't have to be either. To trust the timing of the one who knows the end from the beginning and find your rest in the knowledge that while the world rushes, grace waits. We often think of the great stories of history as being written by the pens of those who hold the most power, the ones who command the fleets, who sign the declarations, and who dominate the airwaves with their presence. We look at the headlines of this very week, in March 2026, and we see the names that the world tells us are the only ones that matter. We see a neighbor like Canada navigating a path of regret through a fracturing world order. We see the intense, unyielding pressure surrounding a leader in Washington, and we see the ancient soil of Iran caught in the fire of Operation Epic Fury. In such a moment, it is easy to feel like a spectator in your own life, a tiny leaf caught in a gale created by giants. But I am here to tell you that the most important story being written right now is not happening in a situation room or on a battlefield. It is happening within you. This is the power of the individual, the quiet, world-shaking truth that the transformation of the world does not start from the top down, but from the inside out. We spend so much of our energy trying to decipher the big waves of global politics, hoping that if we just understand them enough, we can find safety. But safety is not found in information. It is found in character. It is found in the decision to be a person of light when the world is choosing the dark. You may feel small compared to the movements of nations, but consider this. A single candle does not need to be as large as the room to change the nature of the shadows. The individual who chooses hope over despair, who chooses forgiveness over an ancient grudge, and who chooses to see the divine image in their neighbor, even the neighbor the world calls an enemy, is doing more to shift the future than any missile battery ever could. When the structures of man begin to shake, it is a summons for the individual to find what is unshakable. It is a call to rediscover your own purpose, your own voice, and your own capacity to love in a time of hate. The pressure the world feels today is a refining fire. It is stripping away the illusions we have lived by, the illusion that our security comes from our borders, our wealth, or our alliances. It is forcing us back to the core of what it means to be human. You were not created to be a pawn in a game of global strategy. You were created for a purpose that predates every empire and will remain when the smoke of every conflict has cleared. Your inner transformation, your decision to seek the kingdom within, is the first and most necessary step toward a world that no longer needs to live in fear. Do not wait for a leader to tell you that it is time to be at peace. Do not wait for the headlines to change before you choose to be joyful. The power to change the atmosphere of the world is already in your hands, because the author of the story is already in your heart.